The Alchemist's Ring by Jason Lee Willis. Chapter 1. Moncton, Acadia, 1683. Francois de Moelles counted out the money in his head as he waited at the back of the tavern. In his pockets, he only had a couple silver beavers and enough playing card money to get him back to Quebec City. Yet, by the morrow, he'd be the wealthiest man in Beaupré, after he killed the Baron. I'll be able to afford a wife and as many kids as I can sire, Willis decided as his list of fantasized purchases grew so extensive he couldn't figure the arithmetic of the bounty money. All counting, and his own heart, stopped when the assassin stepped through the tavern doors. Willis kept his nose pointed at the ale on the table, but his eyes watched the man slither through the room like a shadow until he found a lone booth in the corner. Muelas took hold of his beverage, rose, and walked steadily across the room. The assassin sitting across from him looked like a drowned rat. If the stories were true, the man was a French aristocrat who'd chosen a life of killing over a life of luxury. Muelas tried not to stare at the assassin's missing teeth and fingers like he'd done back in Quebec City. Any man who survived torture would have no qualms killing in a public place, so Muelas treated him as if he were a poisonous snake sitting across from him in the booth. Is he still here? Muelas nodded. The rain kept him here this morning, or else I'd still be following him down the highway. He's upstairs with a whore right now. And you're sure it's him and not an imposter? Muelas scoffed, and then swallowed hard in fear of his scoff. He nodded solemnly. The Baron is a war hero in my village. Everyone knows him. Even before the war began, I idolized the man. Spare me your adoration. The Baron is an agent of chaos, and his lies and schemes have brought New France to the brink of ruin. I should have put him in the ground the first night I saw him. He's taken as many lives as both the Iroquois or English, and even if the war were to end today, the wounds he has made will continue to bleed. St. Clair, the assassin's name, was only ever whispered in the shadows. Born into poverty, Muelas killed to survive, but St. Clair chose his path of murder. To look at him, he lacked the obvious physical strength of a murderer, especially after torture claimed fingers and teeth. A weak assassin killed with poison or pistol, whereas Muelas, knowing he could overpower the Baron if it came to it, armed himself with blades. When the bounty on Baron Lahontan's head whispered through alleys, Muelas assumed political motivations, but this meeting with St. Clair made him think it was personal. Does he know your face? St. Clair asked. Muelas shook his head. No, I was just a little boy when he first arrived from France a decade ago, and when he returned from the wilderness to save Quebec, I only saw him from a distance, but I'd know that peacock strut anywhere. He slipped into Beaupré in the dark of night and departed under cover of darkness again. I've been following him ever since, and luckily, the rain slowed him down. Listen to me carefully, St. Clair said, leaning in to whisper. Louis Armand de Lame d'Arcy is more than just the Baron of Lahontan. He's more than a military hero. This man received training since childhood, and the powers that shaped him turned him into an instrument of death. If he sees my face, he'll know what's happening. You need to stay here while I gather up enough men to kill him properly. Muelas nodded. With a pained grimace, St. Clair slipped from the booth. More men meant dividing the bounty. Dividing the bounty meant changing his dreams. Changing his dreams was like killing two of his imagined children. The Baron is vulnerable right now, Muelas decided. The giggling whore who led the little man upstairs less than an hour ago would have him off guard. He grabbed a bottle and made for the stairs. With each stair, he transformed himself into a loud, clumsy drunk, and by the time he reached the top, he hummed and muttered one of his favorite songs. I'll be too drunk to remember which room is mine, he invented, jiggling the first doorknob before stumbling further down the hall. Surprise, not stealth, would be his strategy. If the Baron truly were the killer St. Clair described, then smashing around the hallway would be less alarming than quiet creaks of a floorboard. When he stumbled through the Baron's door, his eyes went to the naked horror sprawled across the bed at the feet of the Baron. Baron Lahontan, despite his large title, proved to be quite small and dressed. He wore only breeches, and his thin, naked chest only had a few tufts of hair upon it. A pistol rested beside the bed. Instead of clamoring for it, Baron Lahontan smiled. "Have you come to join us?" Evangeline expected more than just conversation. "You see," Mueles began, feigning intoxication, stumbling and falling in a heap upon the floor. His fingers discreetly moved to locate his favorite dagger. The Baron took the bait, and his feet slipped off the bed to deal with the annoyance. "Honestly, sir, get a hold of yourself. It's only a naked woman." "2 more steps and I'll have him." The Baron stopped. His neatly trimmed toes curled slightly. "I'll be able to stab him in the back 3 or 4 times before he gets to his pistol, and then I'll overpower him." Mueles gripped the hilt of the dagger and prepared to attack. A floorboard creaked behind him, hurrying his decision to launch himself at the Baron, who didn't retreat. A strong hand gripped Mueles by the hair, and before he could even lift his dagger in a threatening manner, a dark blade passed in front of his face and dragged across his throat. The Baron raised a hand to shield himself from the spray of blood coming from Mueles' throat. "Discretion, Gaspar," Baron Lahontan said, rushing past Mueles to the door. The hand released his hair, and Mueles fell to the floor, clutching at the hot blood that came from his throat. His eyes turned to the silent killer who had appeared behind him in the open door. A gray-haired native, dressed in a heavy wool jacket, held the knife bearing his blood upon it. Instead of malice, his face displayed disgust and pity. "We need to leave immediately. He wasn't alone." "He followed me up the stairs." For Francois Mueles, there would be no bounty, cottage in Beaupré, or even a family. Each pulse of blood between his fingers brought an end to those dreams, but he found small consolation that his dashing childhood hero was indeed the man he believed him to be. Well played, Baron Lahontan. Well played. Chapter 2. Shubenacadie River, Acadia, 1683. Louis Armand Guerin tossed his favorite hat into the fire, which dampened it for a moment before feeding the flames. The hat belonged to Baron Lahontan, who, for all intents and purposes, died in the Moncton Tavern. The swell of light illuminated the face of his trusted companion Gaspar. The stern platoon war chief held a sharpened bone in his fingertips, which he dipped into the inky mixture he'd made from ash and berries. With barely a flinch, Gaspar broke skin along the tender flesh of his forearm, and the blood hid whatever pattern he created in tribute to the assassin he'd killed 3 nights earlier. Ink covered Gaspar's body from the lines on his chin and cheeks to the more elaborate patterns on his chest and back. Most tattoos were made during his youth, when he was known as Kondiaronk the Muskrat, who'd kill his enemies and vanish back into the waters. Some tattoos marked victories, others marked tragedies, like the death of his family. And because of his practice of counting coup, when Gaspar died to stand in front of his creator, he would be able to make a full accounting of each man he killed. Guerin had never seen Gaspar create a tattoo before. Over the past decade, Gaspar had been his trusted companion, military strategist, and moral compass on their adventures in the New World of America. During the Beaver Wars, Gaspar's family and people were slaughtered by the Iroquois, and even though Gaspar was a chief of a small tribe, he spent years killing any Iroquois who would wet his blade. The Jesuit missionary Jacques Marquette, however, put out the fires of vengeance and converted Kandiarank into the Christian known as Gaspar, named after one of the three magi. I suppose the debt has been paid, Garin said to his mentor. I saved you from certain death back at Lake Ontario, and now you save me from certain death from that assassin. You're not obliged to follow me any further. Gaspar tossed the stained bone into the fire. It is my duty to the Creator. As Baron of Lahontan, Louis Armand had arrived in Quebec several years earlier with a company of professional soldiers. He was their leader because of his birthright. Gaspar led because of his skill. Each victory gathered more and more refugees to his camp, who joined his fight against the Iroquois. Yet the hardened warrior set aside all ego to follow Garin for the past several years. I'm not the chosen one, Garin said aloud, catching Gaspar's attention. I've heard you whisper to any holy man we've encountered between here and the Mississippi. While the comet of 1682 did announce my arrival to the continent, I'm not the Wishwe or the boy with the strange light in his eyes. I'm just a sinful spy, and you can't follow me to where I'm going. Gaspar kept his eyes on his artwork as he spoke. I know the Serpent Star didn't send you, but still the Creator has made you his instrument. I chose to follow you because it allowed me to retrace the path. You and I visited the seventh stopping place, and now I'll return to the place where the seven fires prophecy was first given. I chose this path because we both serve the people in the war against the darkness. The man who tried to kill you wasn't serving Governor de Brouillon. The assassin was an agent of darkness. Eos knows what you found in the land of the Blue Woman. Louis Armand Garin unbuttoned his expensive vest and tossed it into the fire. He'd inherited the title of Baron Lahontan from his father, and he'd earned the rank of lieutenant and captain by serving New France in the recent global war between England and France. But he was born a bastard to Jeannie Garin. As a boy, the brilliant bastard was sent to Rome to enter the priesthood. But instead, he caught the attention of a secret society known as the Periphery. As their agent, he first traveled to France to reclaim his recognized inheritance, and then traveled to New France as an investigative agent. Eos knows what I found because you insisted that I arrest Pierre-Charles Le Sueur rather than kill him. I flee the continent because of your advice. I should have killed him. You should have made Pierre-Charles Le Sueur your ally instead of your enemy. You were wrong about him. Garin rolled his eyes. He's the only witness to the death of Father Marquette. He's either an agent of the Jesuits or an agent of Eos. Either way, he is my enemy. Garin defended his earlier actions that not only ruined a man's life, but also ignited a war on the frontier. Although the Periphery headquarters were found in Rome, the organization existed in the shadows of the Catholic Church. If the legends were true, it predated the Catholic Church by 1,000 years and served not only to keep the puppet masters in check, but also to protect the oppressed. In recent years, two occult enemies, the Order of Eos and the Priory of Ormus, took an unhealthy interest in the frontiers of America. So, too, did the Society of Jesus, known simply as the Jesuits, who seemingly allied themselves with the Anishinaabe to enter the lands of the west of Mississippi, where a mighty nation known as the Oceti-Sakowin, or commonly called the Sioux, protected a vast territory known as the land of the Blue Woman. Gaspar dabbed away at the excess blood and inspected his work. You must decide if you are subservient to God or greater than God. Eos, the Jesuits, the Anishinaabe, and Ormus all race against each other because they believe their free will can shape the future of humanity. When I stopped being Kandiarank and became Gaspar, I trusted the guiding hand of God to put me where He needed me to be. If you continue to fight against the will of God, your deeds will become dark rather than necessary. The sooner I leave for Rome, the sooner you'll be rid of me. Is that it? Gaspar shrugged. If I stay with you much longer, I'll be tattooing the soles of my feet. Then go back to your people. Guard them, protect them. You know what will happen to all the tribes of the Great Lakes if this war continues much longer. I need you to watch over the lands of the Blue Woman, to safeguard the treasure and keep it from the hands of our enemies if necessary. Gaspar sighed heavily. What is it? Garen asked. When you sail back to Rome, what will you tell the periphery about what we've seen? I'll tell them the truth and let men better than me decide what to do next, Garen began, but Gaspar's eyes demanded more. I will let them know where to find the treasure right down to the bend of the river, and how it matched the sketches made by Lesueur. I'll describe the mound of blue earth we found, and how the local Sioux described the place as the Haunted Valley due to the presence of an evil spirit. I'll tell them that with some digging, they'll be able to unearth the Philosopher's Stone, and perhaps much, much more. Gaspar began to nod, paused, and then shook his head. And what will the periphery do with this treasure once it is unearthed? I can't... Haven't you thought this through? You haven't thought this through, have you? You are so preoccupied with finding the ancient treasure that you never thought of why they needed it. What is their purpose in acquiring it? For starters, it can transform lead into gold, Garen quipped. And if that was its only purpose, it would make gold as worthless as sand. Don't belittle the power of transformation. If it can change lead into gold, what else can it change? Back in Rome, when I was still a boy, I researched King Solomon for an assignment. While there are only vague references to it in the Bible, lore suggests that Solomon turned to occult knowledge to build the temple in Jerusalem. The maps that Eos and Ormus used to search for the Philosopher's Stone were made in the days of King Solomon, and the secret knowledge acquired by Solomon resulted in expeditions looking for a lost kingdom of a forgotten king who made a magical stone. But they didn't find it, did they? The stone? No, but that didn't stop Solomon. With the aid of an imprisoned demon named Asmodeus, Solomon fashioned a magical ring when he couldn't acquire the lost stone. The altar of God, it seems, could only be built of unhewn stone, so Solomon used his ring to build his masterpiece without cutting any stone. A curious story, isn't it? But here's my concern. The Order of Eos possesses a map that suggests they nevertheless found the ancient kingdom. The kingdom of Marek, they called it. Garen said, pointing up to the heavens at the constellation commonly known as the Big Dipper. One of the 7 stars is called Marek. That's as far as my research took me. But stay up late at night and wonder, who is this Marek? This is why I follow you, Gaspar admitted. When you're not thinking, you are quite intelligent. Thank you? Marek. I am researching another version of the same story. Generations ago, the Anishinaabe people lived here in Acadia and received 7 prophecies, the 7 fires, that sent them on an exodus leading west, to the land of the Blue Woman. Gaspar nodded solemnly. You study Eos and Ormus to try to understand their motivations in acquiring the Philosopher's Stone. I study the Anishinaabe legends for the same reasons. By returning to the past, I hope to understand the future. Marek, the 7 stars. The Anishinaabe believe it represents a warrior, Ojig, who battled a powerful enemy who tried to stop the seasons, time itself, from continuing, trapping the world in an endless winter. Ojig prevailed in the seasons and released the seasons, yet the battle against this Wintermaker continued into the stars. Are you suggesting Marek and the Wintermaker are the same? You and I stood at the place where the water flows in all directions and the earth bleeds blue. An evil hand created the Philosopher's Stone. Who was its creator? Garen shrugged. King Solomon had it figured out, didn't he? We must understand the past to understand the future, Gaspar repeated. The Anishinaabe have stories of a boy, Ayash, who battled an evil spirit known as the Horned Serpent. The earliest tales of the Anishinaabe speak of an island, and I mean to find this island where their prophecies began. Garen laughed out loud, bringing a fierce scowl from his old friend. I should be bringing you back to Rome with me instead of my fragments and facts. I wasn't laughing at you, I was laughing at myself. I embraced my role in the periphery because I craved adventure, but I am blind to so much. You are a man of faith, capable of seeing truth and lies. Before I set foot in America, the periphery gave me instructions for my extraction. While I boldly told everybody in the tavern at Moncton that I'd be departing from the harbor of Port Royal, the periphery chose the fishing port of Chester. Garen paused, knowing that the port meant nothing to Gaspar. What's special about Chester, you ask? Aside from whisking me away to safety, the reason the periphery has an agent in Chester is to keep an eye on a special island nearby. A special island, Gaspar repeated, and a slight grin appeared on his face. According to the tales, Eos went to Acadia centuries ago, and after they visit, they cut down every tree on the island and planted foreign trees, so they'd be able to find the island again upon their return. Foreign trees? On the morrow, you and I are heading east to find Oak Island. Chapter 3. Oak Island, Acadia, 1683. Perhaps I built it up a little too much, Louis Armand Garen thought after a prolonged silence from Gaspar. He climbed up onto one of the boulders and waited for a reaction. Gaspar stood facing the open shoreline, which faced the bay and the coastline. You see, Garen tried again, these boulders form a cross. If you count the little one, they are placed in a straight line, and then two more at a perfect side angle. Nature doesn't create straight lines. This pattern is man-made. Gaspar folded his arms. I thought you said the men who came to this island weren't Christian. Why would they make a cross? Eos adapted to a Christian culture. From their Templar days to their new Masonic lodges, it's easier to hide the truth in plain sight if your enemy doesn't understand what they're looking at. Gaspar shook his head. We should have swam. Still this argument? The waters of the Atlantic are frigid, and I'm not about to get stuffed in a cargo hold for my return to Rome. I wasn't about to get wet. You told the villagers that you were the Baron of Lahant. It won't take the men who hunt you long to find out that you're not in either Louisburg or Port Royal. I'm a petty man with petty reasons. Besides, our tour of the island is all but over. Even if the villagers immediately sent a rider, which they didn't, we'll be long gone before more assassins arrive. Gaspar turned away from the quiet harbor and approached Garen. He looked over the stones strewn over the woods, hundreds of yards in all directions from where Garen sat. So what did they bury here? So he believes me. This is the obvious question, isn't it? But I'd like to counter your questions with, why did they bury it here? And the much more practical, how did they bury it here? Gaspar leaned his back against the boulder to rest beside Garen's dangling feet. Years earlier, their brotherly bond began with the early skirmishes with the Iroquois, and then grew even stronger when then-Lieutenant D'Arcy saved Chief Gaspar's life. The trip into hostile Sioux territory, where they found proof of the buried Philosopher's Stone, transformed Gaspar into a father figure. The periphery is certain it was built by the Order of Eos. A few centuries before the Catholic Church broke apart in the Protestant Revolution, the Order of Eos also split apart. It's most likely Eos, but there's a small possibility it could have been the Priory of Ormus. When Oak Island was created would help answer that question better. If I were to venture a guess, I would say it was crafted in the 1300s by Eos. This seemed to satisfy Gaspar. His encounters with Eos had been shaped by the French conquerors of the Great Lakes. Powerful aristocrats like Etienne Delhut, Charles Le Moyne, and La Salle swept through countless indigenous nations. Last night I noticed the stars were almost level with the land of the Blue Woman, and if I'd paid closer attention, I would say your Oak Island is almost exactly on the same line as the place where we found the Blue Earth. Of course, Garen said with a chuckle. The Templars had a mighty fleet, and if the old stories are true, King Solomon hired Phoenician sailors to locate the Philosopher's Stone, here, on the far side of the planet. Only the midday sun was above their heads now. They used... You've already given me the answer. No, I asked the question, Garen clarified. How'd they make it? But you already know the answer. Garen could feel the solid stone under his feet. They were masons? I suppose. The secrets of carving stone used by the Templar Knights were originally taught through the secret knowledge of King Solomon. Gaspar nodded. Your Templars were on the run, scattered by their enemies. If they had any treasure of value, bringing them across the Atlantic would have been shrewd, but they would have quickly discovered that the New World was already occupied, and while the inhabitants were neither ally nor enemy, they would have needed to bury their treasure in a way that no human hand could easily discover it. If they still possess the secrets of Solomon, they'll have no problems unearthing the Philosopher's Stone from its earthly prison. If I'd had Solomon's ring in my back pocket in the lands of the Blue Woman, I could have unearthed the Philosopher's Stone myself. The thought gave Garen chills. I was so close to seizing the prize. I should have killed LeSueur when we had the chance. What you did what needed to be done, Gaspar said, in reference to the political coup at Fort Mackinac that ousted Pierre-Charles LeSueur and replaced him with young Baron Lahoughton. If there is any blame, it falls on me. I also had the opportunity to kill LeSueur, who returned to Wisconsin as quickly as he could. I don't think he's your enemy. I believe the Serpent Star summoned both of you to the land of the Blue Woman. Only he serves Eos. When I met Father Marquette, I killed the man who had once been. The waters of baptism transformed me from Kondiaronk to Gaspar, all because of Father Marquette. Pierre-Charles LeSueur spent his entire youth learning from this great man. If Eos poisoned Father Marquette, as LeSueur alleges, then I refuse to believe this man would betray his master to join his enemies. Kill 'em all and let God sort 'em out, Garen began. It's a race against time now. LeSueur and I have confirmed the truth about the old maps. And when this war is over, the puppet masters will insist on returning to the land of the Blue Woman to claim their ancient prize. I pray only that I can get back to Rome fast enough to make a difference. I need to tell them the Philosopher's Stone has been found within the foundations of an ancient kingdom. And I will remain here and do all I can to keep France and England from reaching the lands beyond the Mississippi, Gaspar reviewed. Do you think Oak Island is the same island that Ayash visited before the Anishinaabe received the Seven Fires prophecies? Gaspar paused, taking final measure of the peculiar island. The same mystery that drove an entire nation from east to west across the continent has driven me from west to east. This mystery drives the Jesuits, Eos, Ormus, the Periphery, and even the Anishinaabe to the lands of the Sioux. Do you really think you and I can stop them from finding what they seek? Probably not, Garin said with a shrug as he began to walk back towards the borrowed rowboat. Gaspar joined him at his side. But we can delay it, and each hour we delay it, we give the old men, the women, and the children another day of life, however they choose to use it. One day, you and I will die, but we'll go to our graves knowing we fought the good fight. The good fight? Gaspar repeated. I wonder if we'll ever meet again. I'll do my best to let God's will guide me to where I can best serve him. Who knows? Perhaps I'll live long enough to see you again. That would truly be a surprise, Gaspar admitted, and almost cracked a smile. Chapter 4. Mahone Bay, Acadia, 1693. Instead of listening to Chief Gaspar's advice, Louis Armand Garin lingered for some sweet revenge. He held the looking-glass to his eye and focused on the small cabin on the edge of the fishing village of Chester, while the rest of the village began to glow with lanterns and fireplaces. The small cabin remained dark. Garin watched from a slow-moving pirate ship. The ship's floorboards creaked at the approach of the fat captain known as the Toad to the locals. Physically, he fit the part, with rolls of fat under his chin and belly, and despite his squatty nature, he dressed in extravagant clothing. Like many pirates and smugglers, Jean Crapeau's true name remained hidden. He embraced the persona given to him by the English, Captain Crapeau. Before King William's War began, he was already a smuggler and knew how to hide or attack. Because of this, the Periphery hired him for a very specific smuggling job: extraction of its agent. The men are waiting for my signal, but my bosun heard rumors of English warships in the area. Just a few more minutes, Garin insisted, reaching into his pocket for a final bribe that would leave him broke. The Periphery paid in advance several years ago, with a promise of a small fortune transferred to him at the next destination. As much as pirates loved money, he also knew a ship full of criminals also enjoyed wicked behavior, which he hoped to indulge. Dark figures moved within the village. Are those the men hunting you? Captain Crapeau asked. Eos is determined to put Baron Lahontan in the grave. A dozen men on horses swarmed the small village and immediately fanned out. After a decade in New France, his big mouth left a trail of breadcrumbs for his enemies to follow. He didn't want to just vanish, or his enemies could control the narrative. Sleeping with a governor's daughter, whether true or not, shamefully ended his political and military career, but it also tested whether or not Eos knew what he'd found on the frontier. Eos assassins confirmed it, especially now that they had followed the clues to his extraction site. Fire on my signal, Captain Crapeau's orders sent the crew into motion. I don't want any villagers to get hurt. The anchor lifted, a few small sails dropped. The powder monkeys gathered at the cannons. In addition to Oak Island, Mahone Bay held dozens of small islands, and Crapeau's ship slid from its hiding place onto the dark water. Garin handed the looking-glass back to the captain and watched with his own eyes as the brute squad descended on the small cabin. He left a stuffed effigy of himself, wearing the last of the Baron Lahontan's clothing, in a large chair facing a fireplace. The killers filled the cabin with light. Let it be St. Clair. The ship drew within 100 yards of the shore, allowing Garin to see the men entering the cabin on shore. Instead of the Eos killer, a bald man led the team. Damn it all. The wrong villain found me. Garin shrugged and nodded, summoning thunder and lightning from the cannons. The next morning, when Louis Armand Garin woke in his cabin, he knew his role as Captain d'Arcy and Baron Lahontan had come to its end. He dressed in the drab clothing. A smile parted his lips. It shocked him that North America was nowhere to be seen. From horizon to horizon, white clouds and small waves amplified the elation he already felt. Captain Crapo stood with his navigator, and Garin joined them without saying a word. "I doubt that we killed many of those men," Crapo said once he noticed Garin. "Was it worth it?" "If it had been the right men, I would have insisted you keep firing. The men who stepped in the trap were private investigators hired by King Louis, who's worried about these secret societies threatening his power. The men we fired on would have slowly tortured me to death to get my secrets. They know I'm alive and that I fled the continent, so in that regard, yes, it was worth it." "How can you be so cheery when you have just become a fugitive without a home?" "Oh, this lone wolf has a pack, and I'll find a comfy hole somewhere in the world to curl up and call a den. I consider it good fortune that the French authorities know I'm still alive. The bald fellow himself worked for the king. Now I'll be able to write my book under my own name. I still wish it had been St. Clair." "You're going to write a book?" "A false narrative. A work of fiction. More like a lie. My enemies know where I've been and can guess what I've seen. So I'll publish a false account of my travels, which will muddy the waters for a generation or more. I'll be dead and gone before they know my book was a lie." Garin suddenly grew aware that the rising sun was on his left cheek. "Why are we traveling south?" "You insisted on speed." "I did." "The currents off the coast of the Massachusetts colony will almost double your speed and let us cross the Atlantic in a matter of weeks. With your approval," Captain Crapo teased. "We'll stay ahead of the news sent by France. By the time the warrants are written, I'll have vanished from the face of the earth." With that, Garin disappeared back to his cabin. After a decade of strutting around New France, he was ready for the silent contemplation in his cabin. 2 hours later, he heard a bell ringing. A few minutes later, a knock came on the cabin door. So much for peace and quiet. When he opened the door, the crewman delivered the tense news. "We've got company." Garin followed on his heels all the way to Captain Crapo, who held the looking glass to his face. "We just sailed past Nantucket Island, and that little ketch came racing after us." "What's the problem?" Captain Crapo lowered the glass to answer. "It's not part of the English or colonial navy." "That's good." "No, it's foolish. We can certainly outgun that barking little dog." "Well, this is your charter, so perhaps I can leave that decision to you." "What decision?" "If we continue, we'll pass by New York Harbor before we make our turn east. One barking dog might turn into a pack of little dogs. Or we turn for deep waters right now and lose him." "I certainly want to return to Rome as quickly as possible, but I'd also like to arrive in one piece. If you think that ship is following us into a blockade, by all means, head for deep water." Captain Crapo sighed as if holding information back. What isn't he telling me? Instead of the looking glass scouring the coastline, Captain Crapo spent the next half hour looking ahead to the waters of the George's Bank. His concentration suddenly doubled, and he muttered, "Damn it all," before handing the glass to his first mate. "Please tell me that's a cod fisherman." His first mate strained as he took measure. A bell sounded from high above. "What is it?" "It's a big privateer, a pirate hunter. We just bolted when we should have held steady to our course," Captain Crapo said with a shrug and an apologetic shake of his head. "Go back to my cabin and put on one of my feathered hats. You're going to play the part of my first mate once we get boarded." "They're going to board us?" "If we had more than a promissory note, we might have been able to fight our way out of this trap. But I'm not going to allow half of my crew to be killed in the fight. If they see we have nothing of value, We might be on our way by dusk. Now, go change your clothes and play the part of a pirate." Gary nodded, and before he took a step, the real first mate muttered, "Sir, that's Captain Kidd coming for us." Chapter 5. Newport, Rhode Island, 1693. Patience is a virtue, Thomas Tew thought to himself as he watched the clueless French pirate ship step into the trap likely set for them, with the little ketch chasing and the big frigate waiting to intercept. Tew didn't need to wait around for the inevitable. "That's my window of opportunity," he realized with a broad smile on his face. The commands were given, and his looking-glass turned from the danger to his home port. Almost 40, Thomas Tew had spent as much of his adult life away from his home of Newport Island. His family had immigrated to America when he was a child, but Newport was where he'd grown up, gone to school, and married. His glass turned toward Long Island. In an extravagant house, his wife and 2 daughters spent a fraction of his vast wealth. The girls were now almost teenagers, and as much as his heart yearned to sweep them up and take them away with him, he knew they'd live a better and longer life by never knowing him. Tew didn't cross the globe to reclaim his forgotten family. He came for his college professor. By supper, Tew had anchored his ship near Narragansett Bay, crossed the channel in a rowboat, and, escorted by a pack of 5 deadly killers, knocked on the front door of Professor Josiah Farrow. "Thomas? Thomas Tew? What in the world are you doing on my doorstep?" Professor Farrow asked, wearing a housecoat over his flannel pants. Once, the man had been his Merlin with years of wisdom separating them. Now, Thomas saw a peer, another middle-aged man. Never an attractive man, Farrow now had more hair on his jowls than atop his head. No one else stirred in the home, a sign his former teacher had remained a bachelor, which will make this easier, regardless of what he says. "I happen to be in the neighborhood. Last I heard, you were supposed to be somewhere in the Indian Ocean." "Those rumors are true, but only because I wanted my wife to know I was still alive. I wouldn't believe the details of the accounts." "Well, come inside. Supper is still warm. Tell me about your adventures," Farrow insisted with enthusiasm, unaware of the killers scattered in the shadows. Knowing that privateers lingered in the area, Tew indulged the professor's enthusiasm for the time it took to eat, and once the meal was over, he cut to the chase. "Have you continued your fireside lectures?" "Alas, I'm transitioning between universities. The Puritan sensibilities at my former university restricted such open forums." "You were fired?" "Oh, no need to worry about me. Since King William's War began, I've made a living illegally shipping texts to and from the other colonies, especially Montreal. Each book is in my library provides enough food for a week. It might surprise you, but there is healthy interest in the Philosopher's Stone, and patrons are willing to spend small fortunes to acquire these books." "You're selling your family heirlooms?" "I've read them all, and I have no children, so what's the point of hanging on to my pride?" "I remember my excitement when I'd see you wink during a lecture, knowing we'd get the truth later that evening here at the fireplace. I can remember one particular lecture about the corruption of King Solomon." "Ah, yes. I'm surprised I managed to keep my position at the university for as long as I did. I don't suppose you've heard of the lunacy happening at the Massachusetts colony. Witch trials. It's probably best I no longer associate the kings of Israel with sorcery and witchcraft." "While the local newspapers probably proclaim me as a pirate, My first trip I made was with my own ship was to the Holy Lands. I sailed right up the Red Sea into the Gulf of Aqaba and walked in the footsteps of Moses. I seem to remember you challenging the Bible. Have you found faith as an older man? Ah, I found my faith, but not in the pages of your Bible, Professor Farrow. I respect how you held to your own faith while trying to understand the mysteries of other cultures. Freedom for all religions. I've taken your lesson and applied them to my colony. Your colony? I've done well, Professor Farrow. A pirate only thinks of himself. My new colony is not only inclusive of other cultures, but is the model of democracy. I'd love it if you could come visit. Who'd tend my library? Farrow asked in a playful tone, but two knew the man had become a shut-in. Josiah Farrow knew every page of his library, and while he remained conservative indeed, the man's mind explored every dark corner of humanity. To be honest, I could use your help, Two began politely, knowing he had a crew of kidnappers outside if it came to that. Help? Of course, Thomas. What is it? I must be something for you to have traveled so far. Oh, it is. It's a bit of a treasure hunt, actually. Do you remember taking us to the old stone mill in Newport? The smile predictably left Farrow's face. A mill? You know that isn't true. Of course. Your theory was that it was an observatory? It is in exceedingly poor condition, that is for sure. I'd love to show you what it originally looked like. Back at my colony, we have an exact replica, except it is kept in pristine condition. Where is this colony? Oh, it's on the far side of the world, I can assure you of that. It's as far from civilization as you could hope for. America once was isolated, but now look at it. It's called the Free Clans, which represents a dozen separate colonies, all democratically ruled, with separate branches of government. Instead of a king or emperor, a democratically elected leader known as the presider guides the affair of the entire island. An island? When the colony was founded, Madagascar was largely uninhabited, and few nautical charts even knew it existed. It became home to people without a flag to wave. Those who created the colony are the same men who built your stone observatory in Newport. Are you saying... Two grinned and nodded. You need to come see the White Temple in person. Get away from this war and witch hunts and sail the 7 seas with me. You'll be safe and respected. You'll be the Pope of the Free States, able to teach whatever comes into your head. I can guarantee your protection. Along with being democratically elected leader, the local people have also promised me to make me the king. I tried to explain that I already have a wife, but they see it as an important political marriage, which I understand. Professor Farrow drew his arms to his chest and covered his mouth with his hand. Too much too soon? I'll explain the rest on our voyage back. It's a time to crawl out of your pages of your musty old texts and into a real adventure. As I mentioned already, I'm chasing down an old legend that connects back to the days of King Solomon. While my visit to Jerusalem was fruitless, it led me to an obvious destination. The ancient kingdom of Aksum, Pharaoh muttered between his fingers. I knew you were the right man for this quest. Yes, I need your mind to help decipher the clues. I'll likely only get one chance at this, so I must do it right. Surely you're not chasing after the Ark of the Covenant. It's not lying in some misty vault. Revelation chapter 11 indicates that it's been taken to heaven. Tu shook his head. No, I am not after the Ark of the Covenant. What would I do with that? I need to show you something few men on earth have seen for several thousand years. He reached into his bag and retrieved the etchings. Using wine glasses, he kept the newly made image flat on the corner. The markings on this paper are from an ancient stone that we keep locked away in a secret vault. It is one of several pieces of a very complicated puzzle. I've seen these markings before, Pharaoh admitted as his fingers brushed the fresh marks. Oh, I know. That's why I've come to see you. The original text is found upon something we call the Odin Stone, the discoverer of runes. Pharaoh whispered the answer to himself. Yes, and while the designer of the stone may or may not have been Odin, it is nevertheless the most ancient written language known to mankind. For generations, the language upon our old relic has been lost to us. We recently learned of another relic, a sarcophagus. How intriguing. Whose tomb is it? Thomas too shook his head. The corpse matters not, but written upon the stone are 3 languages, Egyptian hieroglyphics, ancient Hebrew, and the language used upon the Odin stone. Who else on this planet, aside from you, would be familiar with all 3? Where did you say the Odin stone is kept? I'd like to see it myself. Come with me, and I can explain it all aboard my ship. You want me to travel to your fanciful colony? Oh no, I'm quite happy here in Newport. I've always seen you as a mentor. So come with me on a grand adventure. I'll get you back to your books in no time. Be the best man in my wedding to this princess. Test our theories. Inspect our relics. Visit our White Temple. Help me understand this old mystery, Professor Pharaoh. Unlock the language for us. What do you say? Pharaoh's brow wrinkled in contemplation. It really didn't matter what he said next. Professor Pharaoh was going to Madagascar, whether he agreed or not. Chapter 6, 1693, The Island of Nevis. As much as Luis Armand Guerin tried to use imagination, he'd long ago lost track of where in the world he was. For the first few days of his imprisonment, he managed to keep track of the ship's general bearing, south. With the world at war, he knew England fought a French-Spanish alliance, so he visualized the coast of Florida. Stuck inside of the ship's brig, deep in the bottom of the ship, he had no windows to the outside world, a torture of a different kind. Following a storm, he lost all track of how many miles they traveled, or even the general direction they sailed. Luckily, the ship anchored the previous day, and after a few weeks of constant motion, his world grew quiet. Pierre Leduc entered the cargo with the leftover breakfast, which meant the only torture would be the slop he'd give him. We've anchored, Guerin began. He was the only prisoner that Captain Kidd had taken when he intercepted Captain Crapo off the New England coast. There had been no battle or conflict, and with only promissory notes, Crapo apologized as he handed over his cargo. Guerin. Where has Captain Kidd taken me? You are a long way from Montreal, Dulac answered in French. Like Guerin, he'd ended up as part of the crew through conquest. Back in Haiti, he'd been forced into service by a French captain, but ended up on an English ship in the early days of the war. Are you familiar with Florida? Guerin nodded. Well, we are a long way from Florida, too. Duloc chuckled. Once we left the shores of Florida, we passed by the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, my home of Haiti, Puerto Rico, and now we are in the British West Isles, at an island called Nevis. What are we doing in Nevis? Seeking revenge? The middle-aged cook winked and passed him a plate of scraps. Kidd paid his crew in shared booty, so taking an almost empty pirate ship had been quite a disappointment. Yet, when a thorough search of the logs indicated the cargo was a wealthy Frenchman, Captain Kidd took Garin prisoner, hoping for ransom. Interrogation had been a game, with Kidd and his officers prying bits of information from their hostage. Garin gave them enough so they wouldn't slit his throat and dump him overboard. What sort of revenge? These pirates can't trust any of them. Captain Kidd led a mutiny to steal his own pirate ship. The man who helped him take the ship, Robert Culliford, did the same thing to Kidd a few months later. A few of us had gone ashore for supplies, and while we were gone, Culliford stole the whole ship from us. Ah, so it's personal, Garin assessed. Why didn't you escape during the second mutiny? And do what? Duloc asked. I'm a cook. It's what I do. Really doesn't matter who I'm cooking for. Life is a great adventure, isn't it? Duloc should be cooking for his grandchildren in Haiti, and I should be in Rome. Yes, Duloc, it certainly has its surprises. The next morning, Captain Kidd's ship shook with activity as supplies came on board. Every few minutes, spare cargo was dropped off in the belly of the ship, allowing Garin a few moments of small talk with men he'd not yet met. Where are we heading next? Garin asked, and managed to get an answer. Hunting Spanish merchant ships. The anchor came up, and soon they departed Nevis. Jago Firkin, the supply room manager, entered the room with keys jangling. At first, he'd been the one to torture and beat Kidd. It had been his brig in his supply room, after all, but once Garin made Kidd belly laugh, the torture had stopped. Captain Kidd wants a word with you, Firkin said as he unlocked the brig and swung the door open. When they tried to force information out of him, Firkin had come with several goons. Now he came alone. What's happening? Firkin shrugged. Bad luck for some, good luck for others. Follow me. For the first time in weeks, Garin walked freely through an almost empty ship. It wasn't until he stepped onto the main deck that he discovered the reason. A funeral. Firkin kept walking to Captain Kidd's private quarters. Captain Kidd looked like a baker or butcher, with a thick chest, strong arms, and a strong Scottish jawline. Unlike the extravagant Captain Crapo, Kidd dressed drably. His office looked like an accountant's office, meticulous and tidy. Captain Kidd set a pistol on the desk and sat down. He gestured for Garin to sit down across from him and for Firkin to take the chair on the adjacent wall. At the end of this conversation, Belmains, you're going to have a choice between life or death, Kidd began. Seems like an obvious choice. Kidd had earlier noted that Garin didn't have a single callus on his hand, so combined with a sizable bribe given to Crapo, he rightly discerned Garin was a man of importance. He also knew Garin defended his true identity through the pain. Kidd made the comparison to an Arthurian tale of a knight with a secret identity, the tale of Sir Gareth. The great bully Sir Kay, like Captain Kidd, teased the delicate nature of the mystery knight's hands. I need a first mate, a new one. And while I have many competent officers, educated men are difficult to find. Obviously, you were once somebody of importance, but the fact that you are fleeing New France means you forfeited your former life. But why you were traveling to Rome, I wondered. The Catholic Church protects its own, and you certainly don't talk like a priest. That part is true. I am not a priest. I was almost rid of you. I planned to turn you over to the authorities in New York and let them sort you out. I almost let Firkin take you apart to get your secrets. But an enemy of France might turn out to be an ally. Are you an ally, Beaumains? Bring me to Rome and find out, Garen answered. Do you know why we were in Nevis? Kid asked. Revenge. Kid shot Firkin a cold look. That's correct. Obviously, you're better at interrogation than my crew. It seems everyone knows of my hatred of Robert Culliford, but alas, it seems he's sailed off to the Indian Ocean to be with friends. Mr. Firkin, could you wait outside for a few minutes? I'd like to speak to Beaumains privately for a few minutes. Jago Firkin rose and stepped outside. Scotland has a complicated history. I'm from a whaling port of Dundee, and centuries ago, we supported the Balliol clan over Robert the Bruce. My family is still bitter about that loss, and my father used to tell tales of the dastardly way Robert the Bruce managed to steal the Scottish throne, including an alliance with the Templar Knights. Well, is this what Gaspar meant when he told me to trust in the path God sets before me? You're speaking of the Battle of Bannockburn in the First War of Scottish Independence. I knew it. You're some sort of spy, aren't you? Captain Kidd asked. Garen found himself nodding in self-preservation. And after the battle, the Templar Knights all but vanished from history. They hopped on the ships and disappeared. But what does this have to do with Robert Culliford and his friends? Robert Culliford and I served as officers under Captain Jean Fontaine, together for a few years. And one night, after heavy drinking, Culliford confessed two things to me. First, that he belonged to an ancient order, a secret society of seafarers that extended back to the ancient Templar fleet. Culliford belongs to the Order of Eos? Garen upped the ante with another confession. Yes, Captain Kidd said with a bemused grin. Oh, my instincts about you were correct. What were you doing in New France? The Order of Eos has risen to positions of prominence in New France, and I was sent to investigate their motivations. Now, if your family has stood in opposition to the Templars since the days of Robert the Bruce, then by releasing me or taking me to Rome, you can... No. That's not going to happen. Culliford spoke of vast treasures at their colonies in the Indian Ocean. He claimed the vaults had more wealth than I could possibly fathom. Secret treasure? That was his second confession? Kidd scoffed. No. His second confession was that he was a Ganymede and was deeply in love with me. I punched him in the face and almost killed him for saying such things. And what did that little rat do? He mutinied against me. I take it you're not a Ganymede? Kidd reached for his pistol, but then stopped himself. No. I don't know what Captain Crapo or any of the crew told you, but my investigation was out on the frontier. I don't know anything about a secret Templar treasure. Ah, but I think you do, Beaumains. If you were sent to investigate the Order of Eos, you are likely a dangerous man with extensive training. In the days to come, I think I could use a man such as you. Obviously, you'll have no problems with my paperwork and logs. But once I deal with Robert Culliford, I plan to discover the truth about the Templar treasure vault he spoke of. When the day comes, I'll want you at my side." "You spoke of a choice earlier?" "Yes. I can give you a quick death today. I'll shoot you squarely in the chest, and it'll all be over within a minute." Or, Beaumains, you can swear fealty to me, become my first mate, and continue your mission in investigating the Order of Eos. Do you want me to shake your hand? I gladly choose life. If you break your oath, I will spill your guts with my own blade, and then I'll use them to tie you to the mast as you die a slow, painful death. Garen extended his hand. "You've got a deal." Captain Kidd shook the hand but did not let go. "I can't go on calling you Beaumains. What is your real name?" "You've already discovered my identity, Captain. I am indeed Sir Gareth of Orkney." "Gareth?" "Garen, Gareth. It'll work for now." Chapter 7. Foul Point, Madagascar, 1695. Professor Josiah Farrow disliked most weddings because of the drinking, loud music, and naive optimism that hung on the air. But as a stranger in a strange land, he sat in the back corner quite happy to observe the spectacle of the political marriage. At the wedding table, Thomas too sat beside his young bride, Queen Rehena. Both smiled despite not being able to understand each other. Several factions filled the great hall, which was built like an old Greek amphitheater, with the wedding party down in the center and the guests filling in the ascending wings. As a guest without importance, Pharaoh sat high against the outer wall. The political guests from the kingdom of Imarina appeared to Pharaoh to be more traditionally African in appearance, whereas the local Zanamolata appeared to have Asian ancestry. Although two had insisted the marriage was entirely political, the young woman's lovely face and slender body sweetened the situation. "Professor Pharaoh, you are certainly a long way from Harvard," a voice announced as John Yarland slid into the seat beside him. A few hours earlier, Pharaoh had seen another of his former students mingling with the guests. Two had mentioned him amongst the other New Englanders who migrated to Madagascar. Yarland had never sat for the fireside lectures and had only attended Harvard as a prerequisite to inheriting his family's shipping business. The suave mathematician now served as Two's Minister of Trade and Commerce. "We're both very far from Harvard," Pharaoh agreed, shaking his hand. Like himself, Yarland was a mousy man compared to the wild men that gathered at the tables below. He wore small circular glasses, had neatly trimmed black hair, and lacked a single hair upon his face. "Thomas certainly has created a great melting pot of cultures, hasn't he?" Yarland noted as they both took in the sights. "Don't let the smiles fool you, though. Everybody here wants something. So I'll hide back here with the one person who hasn't asked me for funds." "What do you want, Professor?" "I suppose I'm looking for adventure." "I hear tell that Thomas took you to the White Temple. What were your impressions?" It certainly didn't feel real. I can attest to that. I could spend the rest of the decade poring over the relics he has stored down in the vaults." "Yes, Thomas told me all about the insight you've brought over the last several months. Clearly, it was worth traveling across the world to acquire you. Now I hear Thomas is going to pack you up and take you with us on this raid of his." "You're coming with?" Yarland chuckled condescendingly. "Someone needs to be the voice of reason." "You don't approve of piracy?" "Well, when you serve the king of pirates, you do his bidding. It's a calculated risk we're taking. This convoy could provide the funds we need for our next stage. But should the presider of the Free States be going with?" Everything had changed for Pharaoh once he'd been allowed to see the ancient relics. It woke something within him. Now he had more clues to the great puzzle. He meant to solve them. I apologize for my part in this matter. When I heard about the treasure being carried on one of the convoys, my enthusiasm got the best of me. It's like hearing it carries King Arthur's sword Excalibur. I understand why Thomas prizes his relics, but it doesn't change the fact that he shouldn't be risking his life to entertain you. As you can see, Thomas is an important man. After rising up the ranks within the Congress of Pirates, the chieftains of the Free States chose to elect an outsider rather than someone within their own ranks. Do you see the large man sitting beside Thomas? Chieftain Morrison, yes, he's been one of the hosts these past few months. He's the one responsible for this wedding. If he'd wanted power, he could have taken it. But the man is a true believer. So he set aside his own desires to promote Thomas. And by uniting the Free States living here in Madagascar with the Congress of Pirates, he's made the Order of Eos even more powerful. This wedding will further strengthen our young nation. Even though the population of the Free States is in the tens of thousands, the Zanamulata and the Betsamakara vastly outnumber the colony. Now, thanks to this strange marriage of cultures, the Miranese will not dare pick a fight with their rivals. Thomas will guide the nation out of the shadows and onto the political stage. Instead, he's going to chase after relics with his old professor. We plan to travel together to the ancient kingdom of Aksum after the ambush. I believe that during the reign of King Lalibela that... Yes, Professor, I know what you think is waiting in the land of Sheba. Do you see that smile on his face? Convince him to stay with his young bride for a few weeks rather than a few nights. You and I can be part of the raid, and I can keep you safe until it is time to sift through all the stolen wealth. When the raid is concluded, you and Thomas can go travel back to Abyssinia and tour the ancient lands with heavily armed escort. Think of it as your wedding gift to lovely Queen Rehena. In a room filled with pirates, it was the closest Pharaoh felt to an actual threat. John Yarlin stood and nodded before walking off. Almost 400 years ago, the Order of Eos flourished with the Templar Knights, but on Friday the 13th, 1307, an alliance between the Catholic Church, the Kingdom of France, and the Priory of Ormus almost severed the Eos branch completely. At first, Eos fugitives found safe haven in Portugal and Scotland, but the might of its enemies grew stronger by the day. After a failed attempt to colonize America, the colony at Madagascar took root. French, Scottish, and Portuguese families sailed around Africa to one of the most remote yet fertile places of land not yet used by humanity. Under the guidance of elected presiders, the colony cautiously expanded while maintaining its shadowy naval presence. A stranger approached. Unlike colonists, who dressed in silk and linen gowns adorned with jewelry, pirates wore modern fashion. This man who approached wore a red velvet jacket with gold embroidery and buttons, yet his face was tanned and weathered by the elements, and his beard was rugged and worn. Was John Yarlin filling your head with doubt? Pharaoh nodded and extended his hand. He offered wise words of counsel. Yarland is a rat, the stranger said, still gripping his hand, so whatever squeaks came from his toothy rat mouth should be completely ignored. If Thomas, too, wanted to sail up the Thames and fire on the Parliament building, I'd keep him safe. Just like I'll keep you safe, Professor. Long Ben, he introduced himself before letting go of Pharaoh's hand. Ben Avery, you're leading the attack, Pharaoh assessed. So I have nothing to worry about with these moguls? Emperor Rangzeb is so powerful and so wealthy that he's never even dreamed of someone robbing him blind. Sure, his caravan is large, but guess what is larger? Guess. Long Ben. That's right. One Long Ben is worth a dozen or more moguls. But you won't have to worry at all. I promise Yarland I'll keep you safe. Our fleet is built for combat. You'll have Captain Want's Dolphin, Captain Wake's Susanna, Captain May's Pearl, and Captain Faro's Portsmouth Adventure. Our ships will run circles around those great mogul cows. Don't forget Captain Two's Amity. Avery laughed. Oh, no. Thomas Tew might be the presider of the Free States, but he's not going to be anywhere near this convoy. The Amity will linger a few miles away. Once we have our prize, then we will bring you and Thomas up to inspect the treasure. You're not a pirate, Professor, and we mean to keep it that way. Enjoy the party, because in a few days, you're going to be thinking back fondly on the sounds of merriment. Chapter 8. The Red Sea. Professor Josiah Farrow vomited into the pot, not because of poor weather, but due to the guilt about the bloodshed about to happen. A slaughter I inadvertently incited. Surrounded by his books, maps, charts, and notebooks, he tried not to think about the impending slaughter. Most of the books were about African history, particularly the ancient kingdom of Aksum. Since opening his big mouth back at Madagascar, he tried to stay ahead of the appetites of the powerful men who waged war as easily as they played cards. A fleet of 5 pirate ships now hunted a hippo like a pack of lions out of the African savannah. Out on the deck, he felt the bloodlust stirring in the hearts of the men who'd taken care of him for the past few weeks. Friends who would soon be dead. They roared and cheered, so when the captain door opened, Professor Farrow almost jumped from his chair. Captain Thomas Tew immediately armed himself with pistol and sword. He turned to Farrow and smiled. Long Ben has engaged the Emperor's cargo ship. Are you sure? If I'm wrong about what he carries, we'll be wealthy men by tomorrow either way, Tew interrupted. Emperor Rangzeb wouldn't waste his wealth on this convoy, unless it had something precious to him. Don't worry about your reputation. My spies in Arabia told me what they carry. I'll leave it to you to tell me if they were right. Be safe, Thomas. Think of your wife and children back in Rhode Island. Oh yes, that's right, Thomas Tew mocked. My young queen made me forget all about them. Do you really think I plan to return to Newport? Let the younger men risk their lives. We're supposed to be raiding Abyssinia after this. You're much too important to be foolish today. We're the tail end of the column for a reason, Tew said with a sigh. All the fighting will be miles ahead of us. Those men are hardened killers. I'm just making sure there is order in all this chaos. You worry too much, Professor. But this is all my fault. The Arabian spies claimed Emperor Rangzeb of the Mughal Empire negotiated the extraction and exportation of the ancient sarcophagus hidden in a secret chamber deep in the Arabian desert. Before paying the outlandish price, the Emperor requested proof, which Tew's Arabian spies briefly intercepted. According to their descriptions, the lid of the sarcophagus was covered with the cosmos, and the interior lid of the sarcophagus had a map of an unknown ancient world. For Tew and his companions in the Order of Eos, the identity of the ancient corpse distracted from the obvious truth. The coffin could unlock more clues about the ancient language found on the Odin stone, Farrow had said. It could contain some sort of cipher to unlock the symbols of the Almaric or the Oberon map. A dozen ravenous eyes looked up at him from across the table back at Madagascar, and soon the great raid was planned. Now, dozens of his friends, and considerably more he didn't know in the convoy, would die. When the cannon fired on Thomas Tew's Amity, Professor Farrow again jumped. I thought the fighting was going to be taking place miles ahead of us. He went to the cabin door for a peek. He saw the billowing smoke of the main battle a few miles ahead, where the EO ships were attacking the Emperor's convoy and fat cargo ship. None of the crews seemed to care about it. Instead, They all faced the distant shores that formed the Mandav Strait. 2 had chosen to ambush the Emperor's convoy at the narrowing between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, but it seemed as if others also saw it as a prime location for an ambush. Several smaller ships headed right for them. A second wave of defense? 2 raged when he saw Professor Pharaoh, stopping his orders to deal with them. You do not step foot out of this cabin under any circumstance, understood? What's happening? The Mughal ship that wouldn't keep up with the convoy feigned weakness. Now it is sailing right for us with a pack of smaller ships. Looks like we might have sailed into a trap, 2 said, and gave him a gentle shove to close the door. A trap? We carry nothing of value. The noise of the hurly-burly increased as the wind and thunder intensified. Professor Josiah Pharaoh had grown used to the flap of sails and the crash of waves against the hull. He'd even grown used to the thunderous sound of cannon fire in splintering woods. It was now the abject fear that joined the cacophony of chorus of chaos. He crossed from the starboard side of the captain's quarters to the port, where 3 ships angled towards the Amity, bringing the total to 5. In the distance, Pharaoh could hear the other ships in the battle still engaging in their attack. We've gone from predator to prey. Earlier, when the attack began, the sounds of almost 1,000 cannons firing upon the Red Sea made his loins quiver, but now his nether regions tightened in terror. 5 ships. He paced back to the window of the starboard side again, where 2 of the ships loomed even larger in his window. This is madness. Pharaoh stopped and looked around the captain's quarters. His cot, chest of clothing, and 4 crates of artifacts created a small apartment. Captain Thomas Tew's bed, desk, table, and collection of oddities filled the rest of the space. Wine bottles from 2 nights ago rolled across the floor. Was the mothership bait to lure us into a trap? He looked at the crates beside his cot. The Amity was a 70-ton Bermudian sloop, fast and maneuverable. Before Pharaoh boarded, its 46-man crew, having taken down several treasures, had already a fierce reputation. The attack ship, the Kedah Merchant, never would have picked a one-on-one fight with them. The 4 smaller vessels converging on them changed everything. Now the Kedah Merchant showed why it lingered behind the convoy. Behind the door, Pharaoh could hear Captain Tew barking out orders. The Amity's 8 cannons now fired defensively. The cabin door opened, giving Pharaoh a brief glimpse into the great sea battle. Past Captain Tew and the ship's rigging, the Kedah Merchant loomed large, but far beyond that, the convoy of 25 Mughal ships stretched out for miles toward home in distant India. A bank of gunpowder rested upon the Red Sea. John Yarland stepped into the doorway. He rushed right by and started rummaging through the captain's closet. What's happening? Yarland hauled out a 4-foot miniature cannon. The smaller ships mean to board us. Board us? Pharaoh repeated in fear. He'd come along for an intellectual adventure, not for partaking in slaughter. We should have left you back at St. Mary's, Yarland said, glancing at the crate. Help me drag this out. Even though the cannon was half the size of those on the gun deck and foredeck, it took the strength of 2 men to haul it out onto the back stern deck. Captain Tew's telescope switched from side to side at the approaching sloops and looked forward to the big Mogul frigate they should have been chasing down. Yarland led him to a wooden rigging being constructed by 2 other men. What is he doing out here? Tew shouted. Get him back inside. I can help fight, Thomas, Pharaoh insisted. You? Your brain is the only thing of value on this ship. Now get inside. Yarland and the other 2 sailors went right to work, and Pharaoh saw to his own exile. Back inside the great cabin, he rushed to the rear windows. They were the end of the convoy, and he wondered if other EOS captains in their group even knew what was happening to them. The small sloops came swooping toward them. Gun crews opened fire, peppering the Amity. Pharaoh went over to his cot and used the bookcase and crates as insulation from any stray bullets. From the poop deck, the small cannon blasted, shaking the boards of the ceiling. The 8 cannons diminished as only the 4 cannons continued to fire. The smaller ships are too close. The sound of gunfire became blistering as the Mogul ships neared. Pharaoh did the math. Even though the sloops were small and without cannons to stop the enmity, the gun crews appeared to be upwards of 20 men. We're outgunned 2-1. The pivot cannon fired, and the Amity sailors cheered with triumph at the sound of the cracking wood from the would-be boarding party. Two's sinking the sloops as they pull up. Clever man. Another roar of triumph meant another sloop had been hit, but then chaos erupted. "Port side, bow!" Two shouted. "Cut the lines! Cut the lines!" After 2 failures, the 3 remaining sloops adjusted their strategies, knowing the pivot cannon could hit the belly of the ships as soon as they pulled up alongside. A clash of swords added to the storm of battle. The Mughals had come aboard, but the sound ended quickly with another roar from the Amity defenders. The pivot cannon fired once more, and then again, and with the subsequent roar, Pharaoh relaxed just a bit. "They're fleeing!" He stood and rushed to the starboard window to see the sloop peeling away to tend to the other 4 wrecks trailing behind the convoy. The immediate threat ended, and prey became predator once again. "Injury report," Two barked shortly afterwards as the chase resumed. Hoping to hit the big frigate's rudder, the 2 foreguns continued to blaze like a hyena trying to get hold of the zebra's tail. Just as Two was about to take a bite of the big frigate, the zebra kicked hard with both legs. First, Pharaoh felt a strange vibration like the pluck of a bass string amplified by 100. Then, a moment later, the splintering of wood. They hit our mast. The ship leaned to the starboard side, and then another cannon hit the Amity. Light flooded into the cabin as pieces of the door splintered. One of the wooden shards caught Pharaoh in the ear, tearing an inch of ear away from where it met his head. Holding the wound with his fingers, blood ran down his face and onto his forearm and elbow. Next, Pharaoh turned to the aft windows, where a large hole blew glass and frame into the Red Sea. Save the aesthetic damage, it was not a crippling wound to the ship. Dripping blood as he walked, Pharaoh found his way toward the cabin door to let his friend know of his brush with death. When he stepped toward the doorway, the big frigate no longer appeared directly in front of them. Instead, it loomed alongside them. He could see the Indian crew preparing for the assault. He took another step and tripped. His elbow caught the force of his fall, but his face recoiled against the deck boards covered in blood. Several crew members stared up at him from the main deck, but none of the slack-jawed ingrates rushed up to offer him a hand. Trying to keep his hand pressed to his ear wound, Pharaoh rolled to his side, only to find his shirt soaked with blood. There, a few feet from where he'd fallen, he saw the source of the blood, the legs and hips of half a man. Looping around his foot, a tangled nest of intestines stretched across the deck in front of the cabin door. As if venomous, he tried to kick the slippery guts from his ankle, and as he rolled over onto his elbows, he saw the second half, the upper torso of his friend, Captain Thomas II. "Prepare to be boarded," the quartermaster shouted, but half the crew continued to look fixedly at their disemboweled leader. "Belay that order," John Yarlin shouted, climbing down from the poop deck. "Throw down your arms, raise the white flag, and prepare to surrender the ship. We're finished." John Yarlin turned and jerked Pharaoh by the arm, pulling him back into the cabin. Once inside, Yarlin rushed over to Two's belongings and grabbed a hatchet. At first, Pharaoh thought he was about to be murdered by his old acquaintance, but then Yarlin began chopping his way through the crate. "Get a flame. We have to burn all of this and throw the rest into the back before they can find it." out the back until they can find it. We can't destroy it. Do you not understand how important it is? These texts contain one of the oldest known languages used by man, perhaps even the first. They are copies, Yarlin snarled, and if the Grand Mogul's men find this, they will claim it and kill us all. I'm doing this to save your life, Josiah. If they find this, they won't need you. The original is locked away, far, far from here. Tu has been betrayed. We stepped into a trap. The Emperor wants to steal our research. You are our research. If we can destroy these copies, you might have a chance to live. Josiah Pharaoh understood the logic, but as he watched the priceless scrolls burn and the ancient artifacts from King Solomon's temple tossed into the sea, it all became too much, and he staggered over to Tu's bed and wept. Chapter 9. The Red Sea, 1695. 5 days after the attack began, Captain Muhammad Ibrahim watched as the foreign wolf pack descended on his mothership, the Ganji Swai. Initially, the wolf pack took the bait and paid for it with the loss of the fleet's leader, Thomas II. The pirate ships doubled back when they learned of the Amity's capture, yet by the end of the day, they were back in pursuit. Hour after hour, they harried, harassed, sunk, and plundered the entire convoy until only the fat mothership remained. Who are these men? A large pirate ship had a berthen weight of around 200 tons, but his ship was 8 times that size, coming in at 1,600 tons. 80 guns were ready to send the pirates to the abyss, and behind them, 400 soldiers stood between him and the pirates, not to mention the 600 passengers, including Emperor Aurangzeb's daughter. Hundreds of miles from the port in India, he had no choice but to stand and fight, while there were only 3 ships near them. The Emperor was right about Eos, but can we fight our way out of our own trap? Record the names of these ships. When it is over, the Emperor will want answers. The ship that nipped at their heels was the Portsmouth Adventure, whose crew had come from a port on the other side of the world. The Pearl had flown by them, just out of gun range, and now waited beyond the bow. The Fancy turned to take them on, side to side. They are only testing a resolve. Look to their rudder when they flee and turn. Save a volley for the turn. But they didn't turn, and they had far more cannons than a ship its size normally carried. 60 guns to our 80 will still pound them into oblivion. Ibrahim's confidence, along with his luck, shattered as a single cannonball struck their main mast and sent the rigging and sails onto the deck below. "Sustain firing!" Ibrahim shouted, but the chaos and fear already took over the ship. A moment later, an explosion rocked the boat as one of its cannons misfired, destroying it and killing multiple nearby crew. The Fancy spotted the disaster and angled for the opening in the defense. "The Christians are not bold in the use of the sword," Ibrahim told his officers. "Prepare the muskets, and then give them the cold steel." Unlike European Christians, the Americans could both shoot accurately and wield the sword proficiently. After just 10 minutes, they had a foothold. "Sir, the Pearl is attacking from the other side." Caught in the pinchers, a small mouth began to bite away at the Ganji Swai's tail as the Portsmouth Adventure trailed with suppressing cannon fire. "Put 200 men on each side. Throw them back into the sea." "But sir, what about men in reserve?" "I'll see to the reserve." Captain Ibrahim rushed below deck, where hundreds of religious pilgrims waited in terror. Even if he could coerce them to fight, it would take 10 of them to kill one of the American pirates. Instead, he went to the chambers of Princess Derica. "Your Highness, the mainmast is lost, and we have no choice but to stand and fight." "Then why aren't you out there with your men?" Do I tell her the truth? "Your father knew your presence on this ship would demand the fear and loyalty of every man and woman. Your Highness, you have 100 slave girls sworn to you. If We could arm them and flood the decks. It might give my men an opportunity to restore balance before the third ship joins. They are only slave girls, Captain Ibrahim. We will lose this battle, and then be at the mercy of the pirates. Every soul on this ship is beholden to you. We will fight and die for you, but only if you give the order. Is there no other way? You are this ship's last line of defense. Emperor Aurangzeb knew this when he sent you on the pilgrimage to Mecca. You were meant to protect his treasure. It is the only way.